To put a question to our panel, the number to call 0345 6060 973. Joining me are the Labour MP for Kingston upon Hull North, Emma Hardy, Martin Vander Weyer, who is business editor of the Spectator magazine. Suzanne Evans is with us. In fact, I hope she is. There she is. We can see her now. She is, of course, you'll know her from all the Brexit debates. Suzanne, are you still spokesperson for Leave Means Leave, or do we just describe you as Brexity political commentator? Because that's what I've been describing.
I think Brexit political commentator does it perfectly, Iain.
And Laurie Macfarlane is a columnist on OpenDemocracy. We'll find out what that is, in case you don't know, in just a moment. As I say, lines are open now, 0345 6060 973.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Nick in Holland Park. Hello, Nick. What would you like to ask our panel?
Hi, Iain. Always a privilege. My question is, would the panel agree that the Grenfell victims were acceptable or necessary collateral damage in the war to save the planet? Shall I briefly join those dots together?
I think you should, because I'm not quite sure I've done that myself just yet.
I'll do it as brief as possible. RB, Casey, Kensington, Chelsea, despite being evil Tories, were actually trying to keep Grenfell warm and reduce their fuel bills. The petrochemical-based cladding is the best and in many cases the only way to insulate buildings, especially retrofitting them. So if you want to save the planet, and there is apparently, according to the government and especially according to our friends at Insulate Britain, there's a climate emergency, everything has a cost. And I would join the dots together and say that those deaths are a pretty, it may be indirect, but they are a consequence of what I would call is climate hysteria. And if it's going to save 7 billion people, are accidents like this an acceptable price?
Wow. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Iain. No, accidents like this are not an acceptable price. There is no acceptable price for the number of people who lost their lives and who were killed due to negligence, due to poor cladding being put on their buildings. And it's not acceptable either that we've waited 4.5 years for something to be done about it. And I think with respect, it's completely different to the climate argument, and the need to insulate homes and the need to make our homes warmer is a completely different argument to should we or shouldn't we put poor standard cladding on buildings that burns and kills as many people as we saw in the Grenfell disaster. I think they're completely different points. I think there's a very good case to be made for insulating our homes a lot more effectively to help people with not only the planet, but also the cost of living and the rising energy costs. And I think that's completely separate to keeping buildings safe. And while we're just briefly talking about keeping buildings safe, it's not just about cladding as well. It's about a number of other fire protection measures. And today, actually, in Parliament, I raised flood protection, which is another huge issue, which is going to become even more important because of the climate emergency and because of the changes to our weather patterns. That's going to be the next thing that we need to be looking at as well. How do we flood protect our homes?
Do you welcome Michael Gove's announcement today?
It's a step in the right direction. I mean, there was quite a few holes in it. But I mean, obviously, it's good that he's talking about the fact that leaseholders shouldn't have to pay as much money to retrofit or to repair some of the cladding that's on their buildings. And it would be unfair of me not to recognise that's a positive step. One of the main points, and I was sat in the statement today that was raised, was around social housing, though. Because if we have social homes who were told that this cladding was safe and fine and they've put it onto their properties, who covers the bill then? Because if the government are saying it shouldn't be the taxpayer, it should be whoever owns the building, but if the landlord is a social landlord, then where does that money come from? And if it's coming from local authorities and it's coming out of the social homes budget, then how does that impact on their ability to create more social homes for the number of people who need them? So there's another area there where I think there needs more exploration and it needs to be looked into more details. And it was interesting that this was raised by not just Labour MPs, but some Conservative backbench MPs were raising this as well, about where does the cost for retrofitting come in social housing? So that's a big issue. And as I just mentioned, Iain, which is one of my pet topics coming from Hull, as you can imagine, flooding. We need to start talking about building safety and flood prevention. It is a major issue. It's going to only become more important, and I don't think we're talking about it enough.
Well, living in North Norfolk, I'm on your side there, Emma, on flooding and coastal erosion. Martin Vander Weyer, a lot of these companies might point to the fact that they were obeying the business regulations at the time, and I wonder if that might provoke quite a few legal actions on their part here.
Yes, I guess it might. And with an issue like this, clearly the question is who's going to pay? And, the choices are the people who live in the flats, the government, the developers, the landlord of the building, and so on. And a political answer would clearly be the people you least want to punish are the people who vote. So that's the leaseholders. The people who don't vote are the companies involved who either make the cladding, or develop the buildings or own them, and so on. So we should recognise there's a political angle, but putting the pain onto the developers is a pretty obvious manoeuvre. It's fairer than putting it onto the people who live there. If they take it to court, we'll see whether they, can escape from this. But I can't see what else Mr. Gove could have done with this case so far.
In terms of the next question about Grenfell victims being unintentional victims of Britain trying too fast to get to net zero and therefore to insulate homes on the quick, if you like, do you think he has a point there or not?
No, not at all. I mean, to the extent that I was able to decipher that question, it struck me as a completely crank point of view. I don't know whether it was tongue-in-cheek, but no, I don't think this has got anything to do with global warming issues. It's an absolute tragedy that the planning authorities, the developers, the people who make building materials had not found out the dangerous nature of this cladding material before it was used. But I don't think it's got the slightest connection to arguments about global warming.
Laurie Macfarlane, before we come to your answer to the question, just briefly explain what OpenDemocracy is all about.
So we're an independent global media organisation. We have a mission to challenge power and encourage democratic debate. We're based in the UK, but we have staff all over the world.
Great, that's very concise, admirably done. So what's your answer to the next question?
Well, I agree with both the comments said so far. I don't think this has anything to do with climate policy or the move to net zero. The reality is the main reason why this particular cladding was put up largely was aesthetic. Grenfell is in one of the richest constituencies, not just in the UK, but in Europe and indeed the whole world. And it's clear that corners were cut. And it was an absolute human tragedy that we want to make sure that never, ever happens again. That being said, there is an important issue around housing retrofitting, which is one of the biggest no-brainers in politics today in terms of the gains that can be made. Not only does it help with our leaky homes, we have some of the leakiest, least energy efficient housing stock in the whole of Europe and the UK, but also in the long term it helps to bring bills down and also creates a whole ton of jobs in the process of doing so. And so I think rolling out that retrofitting programme is much needed, but I don't think we should be linking this to the tragedy of Grenfell. I think we're drawing a link here which just really isn't there.
Suzanne Evans.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're going to get consensus from all your panellists on this one, Ian. I agree with what everybody else has said as well, and particularly with what Laurie's just said. Part of the primary reason for putting this cladding on Grenfell Tower was aesthetic. It was to try and give people a more beautiful place to live. And unfortunately, that massively went wrong and turned into this most terrible tragedy. To come back to Nick's point, however, I do think that the pursuit of net zero is going to have more collateral damage. It's going to prove very expensive. I personally think it's unrealistic. I suspect Nick and I would agree on that. I think if you look at the green levies that people are paying on their already very high energy bills, you're looking at the massive increases that we are going to be facing once the energy price cap is lifted in the spring. People are going to be struggling to pay their bills. I actually find myself agreeing with the Labour Party on this. I think VAT should be scrapped on energy bills. And I agree with Centrica and Ecotricity, two of the biggest energy companies this week, who've said that we should be scrapping those green levies as well. The situation we have, nearly half of energy companies have gone bust since August this year. It's a terrible situation to be in. Part of that is because of the pursuit of net zero policies. We've abandoned nuclear, we've abandoned the idea of fracking. I don't think we're going to go back onto any of that now post COP26. I think people are going to suffer, and it's going to be the poor who are going to suffer the most. And I think that's a very sobering thing, and politicians need to think long and hard about pursuing this net zero policy.
Well, we haven't abandoned nuclear. I think you slightly exaggerated your case there.
I think we are certainly closing nuclear power stations. I mean, we've shut one this week in Scotland that has been working quite successfully for the past 31 years.
But there's a new one being built. You can argue that maybe more ought to be built, but it's wrong to say that we're closing down the nuclear industry.
Fair enough. I'd argue more should be built.
Okay. Right, let's move on to another question. It's a text question from Jean in Belfast. If you want to text your question, if you can't phone, you can do so on 84850. Jean says, do you agree with me that the Home Office pointing women to an app to protect themselves on nights out in the wake of the Sarah Everard tragedy is totally avoiding the issue and not the right approach to keeping women safe? Suzanne, I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah, I agree, actually. I don't really see how an app can keep women safe. I think we already have, if you're a woman and you're out on your own, you should always let somebody know where you are. I think that's sensible. I don't think we need an app to do that. I think the problem that we have is that women feel the streets aren't safe. Personally, I question how serious a threat that is to women. I still think, the idea of stranger rape, thank God, is still incredibly rare. Most women are most likely to be abused by somebody they know and somebody they know very well. And with the best will in the world, an app isn't going to change that.
Emma?
Yeah, I don't... we seem to be missing the point here, don't we, when we're talking about this app? We should be asking ourselves, why do women not feel safe on the streets? Why is there so much violence directed against women and girls? What can be done to change the culture in our society that mean that some people think it's acceptable to treat women and girls in this way? That's the debate we should be having. I find myself doing it, and I hate myself for doing it when it comes to my own daughter. I say to her, ring me when you get there. Don't go here. Don't go there. Tell me it's dark at 3:30. Right, you've got to come home. I'll go and pick you up, and all of this. And it's almost like we're educating our children, our daughters, into feeling unsafe in the way that we were educated as women by our mums, by our parents, of where do you go and how should you feel, and where and how do you keep yourself safe. And I think this is, enough is enough. The debate needs to change from how do women and girls keep themselves safe is how do we stop people attacking women and girls? How do we change the culture? How do we change the narrative to say, hang on a minute, this isn't my responsibility all the time to keep myself safe. It's society, it's their people who wish to attack women and girls' responsibility to stop treating women and girls in this way. And I think we need to flip this debate on its head. And so I don't see the app as being the solution. I mean, can you imagine the uproar if we suggested an app should be put out to anyone? If you're feeling you're going to attack a woman tonight, install this app on your phone to make sure you don't go anywhere near them. I mean, this is a state, it's as ridiculous as that. And no, I don't, sorry. I'll stop now, but I don't agree with it.
Well, no, I mean, understandably, you feel incredibly deeply about this, as I think, well, I hope all women would. Do we have to accept, though, that there will always be evil people in our society, evil men in this case, that whatever education you give boys when they're at school or through their parents or whatever, there will always be, hopefully the exception to the rule, there will always be individual men who commit these atrocities. And it's impossible to stamp that out. It's never happened in society throughout history, and therefore all we can do is try and make them as rare as possible. And as Suzanne said, these cases are comparatively rare.
Yeah, of course. We'd all want that perfect society where this would never happen at all. I just think it's the wrong debate to be having. I think it's the wrong discussion to be having. Of course, everyone should take the usual precautions, but what I resent is having grown up, and is that as a woman I need to take more precautions than you, for example, Iain. Why should there be a different level of precaution in keeping ourselves safe because I'm a female and you're a male? And I think this is where we need to start this argument. Of course, everyone should take this, usual safety precautions, obviously, if you're going out and about. But why is the debate focused around why I, as a woman, have a greater responsibility to keep myself safe?
Martin Vander Weyer, when we talk about these issues, I think a lot of men feel instinctively uncomfortable because nobody's going to pretend that Wayne Couzens, the guy who murdered Sarah Everard, represents men in any shape or form. But is this a debate that should only be had among women? It isn't, is it?
No, clearly not. And no, Wayne Couzens, he doesn't represent men. He doesn't even I think, represent the Metropolitan Police in that sense, that he clearly is a horrible creature who's done the most absolutely repulsive act and is in the category that you describe of evil people who occur here and there from time to time in the human race. The underlying problem here is male behavior generally. Can it be somehow directed in a better direction? And over time and with education, with what boys are taught when they're young and open to influence and so on, one hopes it can. As to technology, I mean, one of the bad influences in many respects is all the parts of the internet that encourage and nurture people who have a sort of grain of evil or sickness in their mind, and they can find, all of that stuff on the internet. That's a problem. As to apps on phones, well, maybe at the margin, an alarm, a tracker, something like that might be useful. But the biggest thing society could do is teach boys to have healthier attitudes to women and to behave in a kinder way. That's what we need to hope for.
Laurie.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with much of that. I mean, I think dealing this, through an app is a very sort of superficial solution that's not really getting at the root of any of this whatsoever. And clearly this is a very difficult issue. There's no sort of easy solution that can be implemented overnight. This is something that really needs to be dealt with in a gradual, long-term way, like was just said, through education. I think as men, as males, we absolutely have to be part of that discussion and part of that conversation. This isn't something I think that men should sort of sit back from and switch off from, because at the end of the day, we see this happening, and it is men that are doing this. And so collectively, I think we ought to, as a society and particularly as males, make sure that we are all doing our part individually, while also encouraging the government to be doing much more to address this.
Thank you very much indeed for all your answers to Jean's question there. 0345 6060 973, or you can text 84850 if you'd like to ask our panel a question. We have Emma Hardy, Suzanne Evans, Laurie Macfarlane and Martin Vander Weyer with us until 9. It's 19 minutes past 8. The question from Sean in Concert. Hi, Sean.
How are you doing, mate? You all right?
All right, thank you. I can guess what you're going to be asking about, but go on.
Isn't it about time that Johnson got interviewed the day and laughed all the way through the interview when he was told about the parties, right? Isn't it about time that the police has got enough evidence now to start charging people after having 40 in the garden?
Right. Well, let's put this into a bit of context, because it's been revealed tonight. Paul Brand from ITV News has got an email invitation which was sent out to all the staff at Downing Street to attend a garden party. Well, I say garden party. It was a bring your own bottle party on the 20th of May 2020. Now, those of you with a long memory will know that was in the first lockdown. And somebody has helpfully tweeted tonight a tweet that the Metropolitan Police put out on that very same day, where they said, have you been enjoying the hottest day of the year so far? You can relax, have a picnic, exercise or play sport as long as you are on your own with people you live with, just you and one other person. Now, on the face of it, this is a open and shut slam dunk case, you would have thought, and it's one that presumably Sue Gray will be investigating in her ever-growing report. Laurie Macfarlane, what do you make of these allegations today, and should the police become involved given what they tweeted on that same day?
I think they absolutely should. I think at the end of the day, we can't have this situation going on where it's one rule for them, one rule for us. That's one thing that, regardless of your political stripes across the UK, people really don't like. And I think this boils down to public trust and faith in government. And I think what Boris Johnson has done is really undermined that faith and that trust in government in a critical time like a pandemic. And it's really, for me, unthinkable really that he thinks that he can do this and simply sort of swat it away and get away with it. And really, we need to have accountability, and when actions have consequences. And nobody is supposed to be above the law in this country, even if you're the Prime Minister, even if you're in government. And so I think absolutely the police should be investigating this, like they would investigate any others. I mean, there are people out there who have faced £10,000 fines for breaking these rules during lockdown. For many people, young people in particular, that's financial ruin. And yet Boris Johnson can do things like this without any consequence whatsoever. And so I think we do need to see action on this, and we do need to see accountability.
Martin?
I think that the police probably should take a close look at it. That's the least we can expect. I mean, what's so sad, really, is it's kind of not telling us anything new about Boris Johnson and the culture around him. I've known Boris as a colleague, as a journalistic colleague. I've known him for about 30 years. I worked with him at the Telegraph and for him at the Spectator. The curiosity about this one is I'm not surprised it was a bring your own bottle party, because you wouldn't trust Boris to organise a party if you put him in charge of the drink, really.
Very elegantly put, if I may say so.
You know what I mean? I think it's ghastly, really, because it just confirms what people who have, I'm afraid, known him for a long time, which is his sort of deep personal unreliability and a sense that rules don't apply to him. And now we see it writ large in government, and it's a very bad thing. So it should be investigated to the fullest possible extent. It is a bit of a distraction, to be looking back at these past periods of the pandemic. I so wish we could move on to the next period and not spend our time, analysing the minutiae of what happened in the last period. But really, no, it has to be properly investigated.
Emma Hardy.
Yeah, I agree. And it's very interesting that Martin was just saying, and as somebody who knows Boris Johnson, has worked with him, that he wouldn't trust him to put in charge of the drinks. And yet this is the person in charge of our country during a pandemic. So, that says, I think, an awful lot. And I do find it a bit ridiculous, I have to say, Iain, that this idea that Sue Gray is doing this major investigation, how much investigation should there be into the question, Boris Johnson, did you attend this party? Yes or no? That's it. He just needs to answer yes or no. Did you attend this party? And this idea that needs to be this big investigation into what is ultimately getting our Prime Minister to answer a simple question and tell the truth does seem to be, unbelievable in this situation. But yeah, of course, the Met should investigate. And I say this because I had a letter from a young woman who told me, living in my constituency, who helped her boyfriend move house. And so they were in the car together and they'd stopped at McDonald's for a takeaway. The police came, and because they were from two separate households in the same car together, they were fined for for breaking the COVID rules, because they were sat in the car having a takeaway. She explained to the police, I'm helping my boyfriend move house, we've got all the stuff in the car, not good enough, she's being fined. And I've written to the Prime Minister about this case because, that ended up accumulating that debt to, I think it's in the region of over £1,000 they're having to pay in a fine. She's been charged with that. And at the same time, the Prime Minister is what appears to be breaking the rules and setting the rules for himself. It's not fair. And I think the one thing British people, I think, do have is that sense of fairness and a sense of justice. This isn't fair, and therefore the police should investigate, because as Laurie rightly said, it cannot be one rule for him and one rule for everybody else.
Well, let's say the police do investigate and they find that he has broken the law and he's then fined £1,000. Where does that leave him?
As the Prime Minister, I don't see how he can continue as the Prime Minister if he's been found guilty of breaking the rules which he introduced under his premiership. I can't see how he can continue if that's found to be the case.
Now, Suzanne Evans, you must be Boris Johnson's greatest fan, given that he got Brexit done, in inverted commas. Can you see any defence that he could mount against this charge? Because he clearly was there. There was a party of some description where 100 people were invited, it seems. 30 or 40 turned up. Laura Kuenssberg has got quotes from some of them, some staff members tonight, saying their reaction at the time was, is this for real? Martin should not be doing this. This is a reference to Boris Johnson's political secretary, who I think is a civil servant, not a political appointment. Where do you think this leaves him?
I think it leaves him up the proverbial without a paddle, to be honest. I'm afraid you're going to get consensus again, Iain. I think this is absolutely disgraceful. I think some in the Westminster bubble have tried to make out that all these Downing Street parties are an irrelevance. They don't matter. They're not important. Why are we getting our knickers in a twist about things that are so infinitesimally irrelevant? Well, I fundamentally disagree with that. We're talking about lockdowns, which have absolutely destroyed people's lives. They have driven people to suicide, to the brink of suicides. We've had weddings cancelled. We've had people not able to attend the funerals of their nearest and dearest. We've had children's education absolutely wrecked. We've had the NHS waiting list now at an all-time record high because the NHS basically became a COVID-only service. And this was all coming out of Downing Street. And this was the rules that were made, that you mustn't meet up with people, you mustn't leave your own home, you've got to stick within your bubble, etc., etc. And it's interesting, Emma mentioned about moving house. I remember helping somebody to move house during the second lockdown. And I remember being in my car thinking, am I going to be stopped by the police? So, I'm absolutely sure I'm acting within the law. But it was absolutely terrifying, this idea that the police would stop you even sitting on a park bench, send a drone after you if you went for a walk. And all the time we had people in Downing Street having parties, behaving as if nothing mattered. And I think that's utterly reprehensible. I also think it begs the question about, when did Downing Street know that perhaps COVID wasn't quite as serious as they were making out? Because surely, if they really thought COVID was this serious, huge pandemic, they wouldn't have been behaving like they did.
Are you seriously trying to tell me that it isn't a serious pandemic? 150,000 people have died.
What I'm saying, Iain, is that Downing Street should have known that. So why were they behaving as they did? I think that's a serious question they need to face.
Do any of you think that this could be something that does actually bring a Prime Minister down? Because it does seem to be issue after issue, party after party, scandal after scandal. And look, apart from Laurie, the rest of us, well, Emma, actually, I'm not sure about you. We remember the 1990s and what happened to John Major's government then. And it was one thing after another. Martin, you want to come back?
Yes, my feeling is that these episodes are not sufficient in themselves, even though there's an accumulation of them to bring him down, but that an issue we haven't touched on yet in this fine programme is the cost of living surge.
There is still time.
Yeah, I think domestic electricity and gas bills going up 50%, the tax rises, the wage squeeze, the benefit changes and so on, all the things that are going to make people feel poorer in 6 months' time will really build up a head of steam of sort of bitterness towards a government that hasn't fulfilled its promises. And then all this other stuff will pile in on top of that, if you see what I mean. But I think it's the economic factor is what's really looming like a very dark cloud over this government now.
OK, 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask our panel a question in the second half of the show, or you can text 84850. It's 8:31 on LBC, time for the news headlines with Simon.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:35 on LBC, 0345 6060 973. And don't forget, do watch us on Global Player because you'll want to see my beautiful panel. Emma Hardy, I'm not coming to you because I think you are more beautiful than the rest of them. Emma Hardy is Labour MP for Kingston upon Hull North. Suzanne Evans is political commentator. Laurie Macfarlane is a columnist for OpenDemocracy. And Martin Vander Weyer is business editor of The Spectator. Right, we have a call from Tony in Doncaster. Tony, very good evening.
Good evening, Iain.
Hi.
Say when.
When?
When?
I didn't think you needed to be told, Tony, but carry on.
Listen, it's a first-time caller.
No, yeah.
Is the Brexit we've got the same one as we were promised?
Martin.
Well, no. I'm looking forward to hearing Suzanne on this one. No, it isn't really, is it? So if I may harp back to the point I just made a few moments ago. We were told, I think we were told, goods would somehow be magically cheaper after Brexit, for instance, and abundant and so on. Not at all. Prices are going up, and an element of the inflation we're now experiencing is very much to do with labour shortages and logistical blockages and so on.
Yeah, well, all of that's happening over Europe, around Europe as well. You can't attribute that to Brexit, can you?
Oh, I think you can attribute some of it to Brexit. I think you can say we got a Brexit bonus in the vaccine program, which we wouldn't have had if we were in Europe. So it's not all bad. But I don't think the Brexit we were promised was, as it were, a scientifically or deeply thought out set of promises anyway. It was a bunch of slogans. It was a bunch of kind of university debating society speeches in pursuit of one very big ideological aim, which was achieved. But I think the actual practical outcomes of it are a random selection of results so far. And you may say it's too early to judge, but I think in economic terms, it's largely heading towards the negative, and that's what most of the economists who've been studying it would say. But go on, Suzanne, tell us how marvellous it is.
Well, you know what, Martin, I won't mention anything about all the promises you make on those wonderful share tips in the Spectator that I sometimes bought and perhaps
I am all
so well. But there you go, we leave that out of the equation, those sort of promises, shall we?
No.
I think it's a bit unfair of you to say that we were promised that goods were going to be cheaper after Brexit. COVID was not expected. That was an absolute blindside that came out of the blue. And it's quite funny. I was actually looking at my former UKIP colleague, Patrick O'Flynn, tweeted today a picture of an empty shelves in Washington, D.C. and said, well, they were warned that this would happen if they left the British Empire, which I thought was quite funny. This is happening all over Europe. We've got a lorry driver shortage. It's not just in the UK. Supply chains have been disrupted right across Europe. So I think it's actually been very difficult, really, genuinely very difficult to separate what's been caused by Brexit and what has been caused by the
Do you accept, though, Suzanne, do you accept that there have been difficulties caused by Brexit?
Absolutely. There have been difficulties, yes, absolutely. Partly, I think, and mostly because of EU recalcitrance on the fact that they haven't actually played ball with us. They have, I think, been determined to punish us. We saw that throughout the EU referendum campaign, and I think that that punishment whipping, if you like, of Britain is still continuing apace. I feel very frustrated. I think on the one hand, the Vote Leave campaign was not the government. So, and I remember doing interviews and saying, you can't make any hard and fast promises because the government has got to take Brexit by the horns. It's got to run with it and it's got to make it work. We're simply showing you what could be done. And yeah, there have ultimately been failings. Again, I think because the pandemic has forced things to take a back seat and things haven't progressed as well as they should have done. I think David Frost did a great job. I think Liz Truss did a great job. We've signed umpteen trade deals. Goods will be cheaper from certain countries if you take out the inflationary factors that, as I know you're aware, Martin, have been caused by other pressures. But we're not there yet. We're certainly
beef and lamb from Australia will be cheaper, at the expense of British farmers.
Pig farmers won't exist in the East Riding.
No.
Well, let's wait and see. I think that's that's catastrophizing to quite some extent.
I would recommend, just on the point of pig farmers in the East Riding, Suzanne, going and speaking to some of them and listening directly to them and the troubles that they're facing. It's not an exaggeration to say they might not be here this time next year because of the difficulties they're facing. And I do think it's a little bit odd, this idea, this EU's punishing us. I kind of, if you think of Brexit, we were told it was the divorce, wasn't it? Now, anyone who's gone through a divorce realises when you are divorced, your ex-partner is not going to treat you in the same way he did when you were married. That's the point of going through the divorce. If we've divorced the EU, we can't exactly go, oh, look, they're treating me dreadfully. It's like, well, no, they're treating you in the same way they treat any country which wasn't in the EU. We chose to leave. These are the rules when you leave. This is what everyone should be expecting to be treated in this way, rightly or wrongly. What do you expect? If you leave a union, you're going to be treated like this. It shouldn't have been a shock, whether we agree with it or disagree with it. On the issue of promises broken, though, I do seem to remember the Prime Minister talking about if we leave the European Union, guess what? VAT could be cut on energy.
Well,
he made that statement.
It could.
He made that statement, yeah. And what has he said? This is one of the bonuses, one of the benefits of leaving the EU. We can cut VAT. And as we've all seen so far, has he cut VAT? No, he hasn't.
But the point was that we have the power to do it. Now, we can argue about whether he should do it or not, but we now have the power to do it, whereas we wouldn't have done before.
I accept that point. My point, you asked me about promises that were made during the Brexit referendum and whether those promises have been kept. I said this was a promise that was made by the Prime Minister, and so far that promise hasn't actually been kept. And on the issue of driver shortages, I think part of it is to do with COVID, I agree. I think part of it is to do with the way lorry drivers have been treated for years. My partner's dad was a lorry driver, and when he retired, he was given a good pension. He was treated quite well. But during his career, he saw standards declining in the way he was treated. We're seeing now lorry drivers being expected to drive for a lot longer. So I think that the actual job has become less attractive. But you can't say it wasn't also because of Brexit, because if you look at the data from the RHA, then you can see that a number of people have returned to their countries of origin and haven't come back. So there's been a combination of factors. And I realise that everybody who hates Brexit wants to make it all about Brexit, and everybody who loves Brexit wants to make it all about COVID. And I think the actual truth lies in the middle. It's partly to do with Brexit, it's partly to do with the fact that jobs aren't attractive anymore, and it's partly to do with COVID. And I think all those things actually come together. And I think in terms of people being promised, I just mentioned animal standards and welfare. Nobody was promised a drop in standards, and that's what we seem to be signing up for with many of these new trade deals. And I think people are really upset by some of these animal welfare standards, because one thing, again, about our country, we love our animals. We love animals. We're a nation of animal lovers. We don't want to see animals imported or treated badly. And we were told that the standards would remain the same. And if we're looking at some of the deals being signed right now, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Just a brief word from you on that, Suzanne, because the British love their animals. One positive thing is that apparently we've been able to ban the live export of animals, which if we were still in the EU, we couldn't. But Emma makes a valid point, though, doesn't she? Some of these trade deals are going to lead to reduced standards.
Well, I'll be honest, I haven't looked at the detail on that specific point. I think what I'd say is nobody has to buy that meat. And, I'm a great believer in consumer power. I don't buy meat that I think animals have been treated cruelly. I buy free range, I buy organic.
But that's because you are a nice middle-class lady. If you're a poor person who's got very little income, if you see a chicken for £1 rather than £3, you're going to buy the pound one, aren't you?
Well, you might very well. We could have a very long conversation, Iain, about the whole thing about eating and food and what we teach and how we cook and what's taught in schools about all that. I was brought up, I learned how to cook practically nothing from scratch. I'm lucky. I've got that education. I can put a meal together through a few scraps and some leftovers, and I think I'm quite good at that. And I think that's something that we should be teaching in our schools now. You don't have to have a lot of money to be...
Emma, hold your horses, because I haven't been to Laurie yet, and I know he's itching to get in.
I think, I agree with some of what's just been said. I think what the Brexit we've been delivered is far from the Brexit that was promised. Whether it's the goods issue that's been discussed, whether it's things like fish, we're told it's going to be great for the fishermen. Clearly, up here in Scotland, many of them have had a cold, hard reality check. Northern Ireland, was sort of brushed over in the referendum. Clearly, that's turned out to be a very, very difficult issue. And I think the big question is really, to what benefit? And we heard about trade deals where we're supposed to be sort of sailing around the world, signing these brilliant trade deals, which are going to be much better than a membership of the EU. The trade deals that we've signed so far have been an embarrassment, really. They've either been with microstates or they've been terrible for the UK and Australia, New Zealand, and don't come anywhere near close to making up for the benefits that we had as a member.
What about Japan? We have a better agreement with Japan than the EU has.
Oh, yeah, and we're going to sell them blue cheese, isn't that right?
Well, we can sell them lots of things.
That was the headline of that trade deal.
And we were told we were going to be, front of the queue in the US. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And so I think that when you weigh it up on the balance of scales, there are maybe some small benefits here or there. One big one, to be honest, I would say is the common agricultural policy. I think there's a real opportunity there to do that differently. I think everyone agrees that was a bad policy. But again, looking at in the round, we've seen the reality, and there are some significant downsides. We've seen even in Labour, subsequently the government's had to U-turn and say, we need to actually introduce special visas for specific jobs because we're struggling to get people. And so I think it was really ill thought through. There wasn't really a plan to deliver it as such, and we've ended up, as I think Martin's already said, with this sort of hodgepodge of things that is a far promise from what we were promised during the referendum.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We'll come back to more of your calls in a moment, and we have a great text to finish with, I can assure you. It's 8:46 on LBC.
Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. We have with us Suzanne Evans, Emma Hardy, Laurie Macfarlane and Martin Vander Weyer. Text question from Dean in Kettering. Tennis player Novak Djokovic's mother has said that overturning the decision to revoke his Australian visa was the biggest victory of her son's career. Is it right for wealthy celebrities to be able to avoid following the rules applicable to everyone else? And indeed be supported, Suzanne Evans, by Nigel Farage, who I always thought was in favour of controlling a country's borders. I mean, how bizarre is that?
Well, I suppose it might seem bizarre on the face of it, and I'd agree that Australia has absolutely the right to let in or refuse entry to whomsoever it likes. But I also think when you're talking about issues like this, you have to be fair and equitable in your treatment of people. And from what I can gather, there are other competitors in this contest who haven't been vaccinated and who have been allowed to continue to play. But I suspect strongly that Australia is trying to make an example of Djokovic, who, in my opinion, doesn't really pose any more of a risk than any other competitor in the competition. And I don't think any country, and particularly not a democracy like Australia, should be demonising anyone in particular or segregating anyone because of the choices they've made about their own bodies and what medical treatment they want or do not want.
Are you vaccinated?
None of your business. I've always refused to answer that question. I think it's something that I get really quite angry about, the fact that it has become such a divisive issue and people judge you according to whether you're vaccinated or not. What I will say is, I'm absolutely not anti-vaccination. I'm very pro-vaccination. I think the COVID
so you are vaccinated
clearly work. And you can think what you like. As I say, I'm not going to confirm or deny otherwise.
It's funny because I've never had anyone refuse to answer that question before.
Well, here you go. It's always nice to be a first on your show, Iain. I think, why have we turned this question into such a divisive issue? What I do with my body, as long as I don't affect anybody else, is my business.
But that's the key, isn't it? That's the key.
Should we all be on this panel saying what our STI status is, whether we've suffered from any other contagious diseases, what other vaccines we have? Have I had the flu vaccine? Have I had the TB vaccine? Have I given my children vaccines? We don't ask those questions. And I'm really quite concerned that this one particular issue is becoming so divisive. And it wouldn't matter if it weren't for the fact that government policy is now going down the line of preventing people who haven't had the COVID vaccine from engaging in normal everyday society. And I find that deeply sinister and worrying.
Other countries are doing that. I don't think this government has.
I think exactly. Well, the same applies to them as well.
But the point that you just said, well, as long as it doesn't affect anyone else, isn't that the whole point? That if you are vaccinated, you are less likely to infect somebody else?
I don't think that's true. I think COVID vaccines, as far as I can tell, don't operate like conventional vaccines in the sense that they don't stop you actually passing it on.
They don't stop it, but they can help you prevent it. You're less likely to pass it on.
I'm not sure how much less likely you are to pass it on in terms of the vaccine, as opposed to, say, if you've had COVID but not the vaccine, you're probably still less likely to pass it on. I think actually what we're seeing is they're mostly symptom suppressants. They're less likely to, they prevent you from getting ill, which is a good thing.
Laurie.
Well, I am vaccinated and boosted. And I think for me, the question with the Djokovic issue is clearly this is a matter for the Australian authorities and it's up to them. But the wider issue here, I think, is Djokovic we have one of the world's top athletes here who's clearly therefore, a role model for millions. And I think his behaviour around COVID, not just in this instance, but across the board, has been quite odd and in a way quite irresponsible. Not only has he not been vaccinated, it now appears that he was mingling with fans at the time when he claimed he had COVID. And throughout the whole pandemic, he's shown a really quite significant disregard, really, for this, for not just his own safety, but the safety of others. He held a tournament during some of the height of the pandemic, again, where there was lots of unvaccinated people, where subsequently lots of people got the virus. And so, as a role model, as one of the world's top athletes, I really don't think he's covered himself in glory here, albeit in this case, it looks like he may well get to play in Australia. But overall, I really don't think it looks good for him.
Martin and Emma, if you're very brief in your answers, we might squeeze in one more question. Martin.
Okay. So I'm with Laurie there to the extent I think Djokovic is a bit of a crank. I think he has a right to not be vaccinated if that's his choice, but he then has responsibilities, both as a public figure and not to increase the chances of passing it on to people with whom he's in close proximity. I don't think this is really a libertarian issue. I think it's a statistical issue. The fact is, it's bloody stupid not to get vaccinated, given the entire body of statistical evidence that says you're safer and the people around you are safer if you're all vaccinated. Simple as that.
Emma.
Well, I do think it's worth maybe mentioning there is a difference, of course, between STIs and COVID in that you can't catch an STI from standing close to somebody on the underground. So there is a difference when we're talking about whether we want to declare our status as and what we're carrying.
You haven't been on the district line lately.
And I do also wonder, genuinely, with respect, Suzanne, I mean, would you refuse treatment in hospital without knowing exactly what was in the drugs or what was in the medicine? I mean, I've luckily not been in hospital too many times other than childbirth. And I know during childbirth, I was quite keen to take whatever drugs I offered. Didn't really ask too many questions about them at the time. So I have no problem in being injected with the vaccination. But just on Djokovic, we said at the beginning, the rules apply to everyone. There's not one rule for one person, one rule for everybody else. If the rules are the rules, those are the rules. He should follow them if everybody else has. And I think it is, as you mentioned, Iain, interesting that we have Nigel Farage commenting on Australia's immigration.
He's not just commenting. He's with the Djokovic family in is it Serbia? I think it is, isn't it?
Yeah, because I did think an Australian-based point system was what he preferred, but maybe it's points for some and points not for everyone. It's difficult to know who would get the points.
The judge seems to agree with Farage in Australia, so I'll just put that out there.
All right. It's the first time you have for a long time as well. 45 seconds each answering the next question, which is not easy to answer in 45 seconds. But Sarah in Walthamstow says, should the government be doing more to protect us ordinary people from the cost of living crisis? Martin.
It's not easy for the government to do stuff other than by cutting taxes and therefore making the the fiscal position worse. But they're going to have to do something in the next few months because it's going to be too painful a squeeze. So I am waiting to see what bodged bundle of measures. It may be VAT cuts, it may be targeted subsidies, something. They got to do something. And also the public have got used to the idea of the government being able to sort of come up with enormous sums of money out of thin air to address COVID. So they will be expecting action, but not easy because this is a global inflation spike that we're caught up in.
Laurie.
Yes, they can and should be doing more, and they can start by just stopping doing the things that they're doing, which are making it worse. The government's cut universal credit from what it was before, which has contributed to the problem. They're increasing taxes. And when it comes to energy bills, yes, some of this is to do with global gas prices, but some of it's self-inflicted from bad energy policy over many years. And so there are lots of things the government could and should be doing, because I think Martin's right, this is going to be a big, big issue in 2022. And many people, are already struggling, and it's going to get very, very difficult. And so there's lots more they should be doing. They should stop dragging their heels on it.
Emma?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, VAT on energy, we've already mentioned the government have an extra 2.3 billion to play with an additional receipts from the increased money that they've got from the oil and gas, so they can use that straight away. We should also be looking at increasing the minimum wage. We should be looking at universal credit, as been mentioned as well, because if we don't, and I do understand Martin's point around inflation, but if we don't take action to support the poor people in society, then that will cost our economy longer more in the long term. And I've seen lots of people saying, why is it that we have such a vulnerable situation in our society where we have a group of people where there's a small change in the economic conditions find themselves facing abject poverty? Surely we need to be looking more generally at the system that we have in society to make it more fair and more equitable. But there are simple things that the government could do right now. And as we've mentioned, Iain, they can do it because we've left the EU, so they can go tomorrow, sign that piece of paper and cut that VAT. So let's wait and see if the Prime Minister actually does it.
Suzanne?
Yeah, absolutely. We started off this programme this hour talking about Boris, his poll ratings at absolute rock bottom. If he were to cut taxes, cut the VAT on energy, scrap those green levies, increase the personal allowance, basically, if he did what most Tories I know want him to do, they don't want a change of leader, they want the leader to change. Boris needs to get back to his Conservative roots, find that low tax conservatism. Not only might he save himself, but he might save us all from the cost of living crisis too.
Good soundbite there, I must admit. Now, my producers just reminded me at the beginning of the programme, I said I would plug Martin's book remorselessly, and I haven't done it once yet, so I'm about to do it. His new book is called The Good, the Bad and the Greedy, an examination of whether capitalism is fit for purpose and how to fix it. Right, final fun text from Gordon in Hampstead says, can you ask your panel, after Michael Gove was trapped in a lift with a security guard in the BBC's broadcasting house this morning, who they would like to be trapped in a lift with and why? Or I'll give you an alternative. Who would you not like to be trapped in a lift with and why? Let's go to Laurie.
Boris Johnson immediately springs to mind, to be honest. I don't think I'd like to be trapped in a lift with him. I think that I think he'd be pretty poor company. But I don't think, in terms of the immediate person that springs to mind, unfortunately, it's the Prime Minister, I think. I think that bears reflection on where he's at.
Suzanne?
I think I would like to be trapped in the lift with Boris Johnson so I could give him a bit of advice.
Emma?
Oh, I'm going to name someone you probably don't know, but I'm going to take it positive. Who would I like to be trapped in the lift with? An amazing author called Faye Weldon, who is my favourite female author, and she's in her 80s and she's incredible, and I would love to meet her, so I'd love to be trapped in the lift with her.
Why do you think I would never have heard of Faye Weldon? Everyone's heard of Faye Weldon.
I'm so pleased, because I mentioned it once before, and I was asked by some people, and they all just looked at me, and I just think she's amazing. I'm currently rereading every book she's ever written, and I'm up to about 1988, The Cloning of Joanna May.
Wow.
On my rereading every book she's ever written. I love her, so I would love to be in a lift with her, even though she'd probably want to run away scared, because I tell her how much I loved her when I was in the lift with her.
True fangirl. Martin?
Well, I wouldn't mind being trapped in a lift with Boris, because actually he's always good for a laugh, but I'd hate to be trapped in a lift with Djokovic, because he'd probably give me COVID.
Well, I would not like to be trapped in a lift with Joe Biden, given his flatulence problems. But there we are. On that high note, Emma Hardy, Martin Vander Weyer, Laurie Macfarlane and Suzanne Evans, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Cross Question. Remember, if you missed any of tonight's programme, or indeed previous editions, you can catch up on Global Player or wherever you get your podcasts from. Coming up in a moment, we're going to return to the subject of the latest Downing Street party, which in my opinion is the most serious one of them all. How can Boris get himself out of this one, I ask you? 0345 606 973. It's 3 minutes past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, an email inviting people to a Downing Street party during the first COVID lockdown in May 2020 has emerged online. About 40 people were said to be in the garden, including